Welcome to Pillow Talk Dreams, where every night becomes a story and every story leads you to peace. If you love calm voices, gentle journeys, and stories that help you drift into dreams, then don't forget to subscribe and let your nights be a little softer. Now close your eyes and let the story begin. The haunted lake house arrival. At the lake house, the night was quiet, except for the slow rhythm of waves brushing against the wooden dock. A pale moon hung over Silver Pine Lake, its light stretching across the dark water like a path to somewhere forgotten. The air smelled of pine and rain, and every sound seemed to echo a little longer than it should. Clara Morgan tightened her coat around her shoulders as the taxi rolled to a stop in front of an old two-story house overlooking the lake. The headlights swept across the porch, dusty, weathered, and covered in vines that looked like they had been holding the place together for years. She had driven 5 hours out of the city to get here. A remote house her aunt had left her in her will. The lake house, the lawyer had called it. Clara had imagined something cozy, with rocking chairs and a warm glow from the windows. But the house standing before her looked like it had been asleep for decades. Still, there was something peaceful about it. The stillness, the mist curling off the water, the hush of the forest beyond. It felt like time slowed down here, like even her own thoughts softened into whispers. She carried her bag to the porch, where an old brass key waited under a stone frog just as the lawyer had promised. The key clicked easily, the door opened with a soft sigh, and a wave of cool air brushed her face. Inside, the house smelled faintly of cedar and lake water. The furniture was old but untouched, and there was a certain quiet dignity to everything. The faded rug, the empty fireplace, the photographs on the walls showing generations who once smiled here. Clara set her suitcase down and walked slowly through the living room. Every footstep echoed. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like a memory waking up. At the back of the house, a large window overlooked the lake. She stood there watching the moonlight ripple across the surface. The air was cold, but she didn't mind. She felt strangely like the house was welcoming her. Then from somewhere upstairs came a sound. Not loud, just a gentle thud, almost like footsteps, but slow, deliberate. Clara turned toward the staircase. The banister glowed faintly in the moonlight spilling through the window. Probably the wood settling, she whispered, trying to convince herself. But when she listened again, she heard it. A faint creak, another step, and then silence. The house seemed to hold its breath. Clara took a deep breath, smiled nervously, and said softly to the empty room, "I guess you've been lonely, huh?" Outside, the lake shimmered. The moon's reflection rippled once, twice, and then went perfectly still. A mist had settled across Silver Pine Lake, blurring the trees on the opposite shore into ghostly shapes. The first thing Clara noticed when she woke was how quiet it was. No cars, no people, just the gentle drip of dew from the porch roof and the occasional call of a loon echoing across the water. For the first time in months, she felt rested. She made herself a cup of coffee on the old gas stove. The kettle hissed, and the sound filled the silence like an old song. When she opened the kitchen window, the smell of pine drifted in, sharp and sweet. A chill crept through the air, but it wasn't unpleasant. It was the kind of cold that made you breathe deeper, slower, calmer. As she stood there sipping, she thought again about the noise she'd heard last night, the footsteps. She smiled now, shaking her head. Old houses have their own ways, she murmured. Wood sighs, doors breathe. Still, curiosity tugged at her. She decided to explore the upstairs, where the sound had come from. The stairs creaked beneath her feet as she climbed. The sunlight came through a high window, cutting pale stripes across the walls. At the top of the staircase, a long hallway stretched ahead, lined with closed doors. The air up here felt different, colder, heavier somehow, as if time had slowed even more. Dust floated in golden beams of light, drifting lazily like sleep itself. She opened the first door on the left, a small bedroom, neatly made bed, curtains faded to pale blue. On the dresser sat a porcelain music box shaped like a swan. When she turned the key at its base, the swan began to spin, and a soft lullaby filled the room. A few notes cracked and wavered, but the melody was still beautiful, a little sad, a little sweet. Clara smiled. "You've been waiting a long time to sing again," she whispered. The sound carried faintly into the hallway, echoing softly through the air. She opened the next door. Another bedroom, empty this time except for a single rocking chair near the window. The chair faced the lake, and for a strange moment, Clara could almost picture someone sitting there. An old woman, maybe, gazing at the water for hours, waiting for someone who never came. Then she noticed something odd. The air in this room was warmer. The faint scent of lavender hung in the air, and the chair was moving. Not much, just a gentle, slow rock like a breath. Clara stood perfectly still. Her heart began to beat a little faster, but the movement wasn't frightening. It was strangely calm, like someone sighing in their sleep. The chair rocked twice more, then stopped. Silence returned. Clara whispered into the quiet, "If you're still here, it's okay. I don't mind." The lake shimmered outside the window. Somewhere, a bird sang. And just for a moment, Clara thought she heard a woman's voice humming. So faint, it could have been the wind. She smiled, stepped back into the hallway, and closed the door gently. The afternoon sun drifted lazily across the sky, its golden light spilling into the rooms of the lake house. Hours had passed since Clara's morning walk through the upstairs hallway, but the quiet stillness of the house had not changed. It felt as though the air itself moved slower here, each breath, each sound, wrapped in softness. After a simple lunch of tea and biscuits, Clara decided to explore the rest of the house. She found a narrow staircase near the kitchen that led to a room tucked behind the main floor. A small study with shelves filled with dusty books and papers yellowed by time. The scent of old paper and pine filled the air. The floorboards creaked beneath her as she stepped inside. On the far wall hung a large painting. It was a portrait of a woman standing by the very same lake that shimmered just outside the window. The woman wore a white dress, her hair long and dark, her expression peaceful but distant, as if her mind lingered somewhere far away. There was no name on the frame, but Clara felt something familiar about her, not from memory, but from emotion, as though she'd met her in a dream long ago. The eyes in the portrait were painted with startling depth. They seemed to follow her gently as she moved about the room, not in a way that frightened her, more as if the woman was curious, watching kindly. On the desk below the painting lay a small stack of letters tied together with a faded blue ribbon. The top one bore the initials EM written in delicate handwriting. Clara hesitated before untying the ribbon, as though she were opening a secret not meant to be disturbed. Inside, the paper was brittle, but the words were still clear. June 12, 1912. The nights grow longer at the lake. I hear the water whisper when the moon is full. Sometimes I think it remembers. Clara read the line twice. Something about it sent a soft shiver through her, not fear, but wonder. The next letter was shorter. I dream of the water calling my name. I feel peace there, though the world sleeps in silence. If you ever return, you'll find me where the moon touches the lake. She set the letters down carefully. The room felt suddenly warmer, as if sunlight had thickened in the air. For a while, she simply sat in the old armchair by the window, gazing at the lake outside. The water gleamed silver and still, the trees mirrored perfectly in its surface. As she watched, a faint ripple appeared, just one, then faded again into glass-like calm. Clara whispered, "E.M. Whoever you were, you loved this place too." Behind her, the faintest sound of paper rustling drifted from the desk. When she turned, the letters were untouched, but the ribbon, which had been lying loose, was tied once more into a perfect bow. Clara's lips curved into a slow, quiet smile. "Thank you," she said softly, and the wind outside seemed to sigh in reply. That evening, the lake shimmered like glass. The last of the daylight slipped away behind the forest, and the sky turned a dusky violet. The first stars blinked above the water, fragile and distant, like forgotten wishes. Clara sat on the old wooden dock, her legs dangling above the still surface. She had brought a lantern with her, its glow warm and soft, barely disturbing the quiet around her. The lake seemed endless in the dark. Its surface reflected the moon so perfectly that it felt as though she was staring into another world beneath the water. A silent, mirror world that waited for something. The air was cool, carrying the scent of damp pine and earth. Every now and then she heard the faint lap of water against the shore, rhythmic and steady, like the slow breathing of something asleep. Clara closed her eyes and let the sounds of the night fill her mind. The gentle waves, the faint whisper of wind through the reeds, the soft hum of insects hidden in the trees. For a while, everything was peace. Then faintly she heard it a murmur beneath the surface. She opened her eyes slowly. The lake was still, perfectly still. But the sound was there again, not loud, not clear like someone speaking from a distance under the water. A voice calm and slow, almost like a lullaby. She leaned forward, her reflection rippling. "Hello," she whispered. The voice seemed to answer, a low tone, a word she couldn't understand, rising like a sigh through the stillness. It wasn't frightening. In fact, the sound filled her with a strange comfort, like being remembered by someone she'd forgotten. Then she saw it, a soft glow deep beneath the surface. At first it was faint, like moonlight caught under the water. But slowly it brightened, swirling in slow motion, as if something far below was gently stirring. The light shimmered, curved, and then disappeared. Silence. The lake became still once more, the reflection of the moon returning to perfect form. Clara sat quietly, her heart calm, her mind wrapped in wonder. Whatever she had heard, whatever she had seen, didn't feel dangerous. It felt old, like part of the lake itself, something that had always been here, watching, listening. She whispered softly, "I don't know who you are, but thank you for the peace." The water rippled once, a gentle wave that touched the edge of the dock and faded away. She smiled faintly, then rose and carried her lantern back toward the house. As she reached the porch, she glanced back one last time. The lake looked serene under the moonlight, but just as she turned to go inside, she noticed something. In the reflection on the water, standing beside her own, was another figure, a woman in white, still, quiet, and smiling. The night passed quietly, though sleep came to Clara in soft, half-formed dreams. She dreamt of the lake glowing under the moonlight, of voices humming beneath the surface, and of a woman standing by the shore, her dress pale as mist, her hair drifting like shadow. When Clara woke, dawn had already begun to stretch pale fingers of light across the room. She lay still for a while, listening to the gentle sound of the waves lapping the shore. The air smelled faintly of rain and cedar. She rose, wrapped herself in a shawl, and walked to the window. The lake was calm again, smooth and silver under the morning sky. But in the reflection on the water, just for a heartbeat, she thought she saw her, the woman in white, standing where the dock met the water, looking toward the house. Then the breeze shifted and the image rippled away. Clara exhaled softly. There was no fear in her, only quiet curiosity and a strange connection that felt older than her own life. She went downstairs and made tea, the kettle's whistle cutting gently through the silence. As she poured, she noticed something unusual on the kitchen table, a single white flower resting in the center. It hadn't been there the night before. Its petals glowed faintly, still damp with dew, as though freshly picked. She touched it gently and a shiver of cool air brushed her skin. The scent was soft, like water and lavender. Clara carried the flower outside. Mist lingered over the water, drifting in silver veils. The dock stretched out before her, quiet and still. She walked to the end of it, holding the flower in her hand. "I know you're here," she said softly, almost like a prayer. "I don't mean to disturb you." For a long moment, there was only the sound of rippling water. Then, as the mist thinned, she saw her. The woman in white stood across the lake, near the edge of the trees. Her form was faint, like sunlight through fog, but she was there watching. Clara's breath caught, not from fear, but awe. The woman lifted her hand slowly, as if in greeting. The gesture was gentle, filled with warmth, a greeting from one soul to another. Then she turned toward the lake and began to walk. Her steps didn't break the surface. She moved across the water, each motion graceful and silent, until the mist swallowed her whole. Clara stood motionless, heart calm, breath slow. Something deep inside her whispered that this spirit was not bound by sorrow, but by memory, that she wasn't haunting the lake out of pain, but of love. She placed the white flower gently into the water. It floated, circling once, twice, and then drifted out toward the mist. A soft voice, like the one she'd heard beneath the surface, echoed faintly across the still air, not words, just melody, old and peaceful. The water shimmered and the flower vanished beneath it. That evening, the sky over Silver Pine Lake turned the color of faded violet. The wind was calm, and the first stars trembled above the water. The world seemed wrapped in velvet silence, the kind of silence that feels alive. Clara sat by the fireplace with a blanket around her shoulders, watching the flames flicker and dance. The warmth filled the room, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the woman in white, to the flower, the soft melody, and the way the lake seemed to breathe with secrets. On the table beside her lay the old letters tied with the blue ribbon. She hadn't opened them again, but they seemed to hum faintly with presence, like the pages still remembered the hands that had written them. As the firelight dimmed, Clara decided to step outside once more. The air was cold and clean, the lake like a mirror. A thin fog hovered above the surface, glowing faintly beneath the moonlight. She walked slowly down the dock. The boards creaked gently beneath her feet, and the sound echoed softly across the water. When she reached the end, she noticed something strange. Tiny lights, dozens of them, floating just above the lake. They shimmered faintly, moving with the rhythm of the breeze. At first, she thought they were fireflies, but these lights didn't blink. They glowed steady and pure, soft blue, pale gold, and silver white. They drifted across the surface in graceful arcs, forming shapes that shimmered, dissolved, and reappeared again, like memories caught between worlds. Clara whispered, "Are you showing me something?" The lights pulsed gently in reply, their glow deepening. Then slowly they began to move together, swirling into a faint outline. A figure, a woman made entirely of light, standing just beyond the dock. The same serene presence as before, her expression calm, her eyes kind and full of knowing. Clara took a small step closer. "You're the one from the portrait," she breathed. The light flickered, and the air shimmered softly around her as though in confirmation. A sound followed, not quite a voice, more like the sigh of wind through reeds, but the meaning was clear. Clara felt it, not in her ears, but in her heart. "The lake remembers." The words rippled through her mind, gentle and warm. The woman lifted her hand and pointed toward the far side of the lake, where the trees grew thick and dark. A faint glow shimmered there between the pines, a reflection of something buried, something waiting. Then, as suddenly as they had appeared, the lights began to fade. One by one, they drifted back into the water, vanishing beneath its glassy surface until only the moon remained, full and steady above. Clara stood there for a long while, listening to the stillness. Her heart was calm, her breath slow. She didn't feel alone. As she turned to walk back toward the house, the last of the lights flickered once more, a single, soft pulse of blue like a heartbeat beneath the lake. And then the night went quiet again. Morning came wrapped in silver mist. The sunlight had not yet broken through the clouds, and the world beyond the windows looked like a watercolor painting, soft, hazy, and quiet. Clara sat by the window with her hands around a warm cup of tea. The events of the night drifted in her thoughts like gentle waves. The lights, the figure, the whisper that the lake remembered, it all felt real, yet dreamlike. She couldn't shake the feeling that the woman in white was guiding her somewhere. The gesture toward the far side of the lake had felt like an invitation, not a warning. After breakfast, she packed a small bag with a lantern, a notebook, and the letters tied with the blue ribbon. She slipped on her coat and stepped outside. The air was cool and still, filled with the smell of wet pine and lake mist. The rowboat, old but sturdy, waited by the dock. Its oars rested neatly along the edge, as though someone had placed them there for her. Clara hesitated only a moment before stepping in. The boat rocked gently, then steadied. With slow, steady strokes, she began to row toward the far shore, the one the spirit had shown her. The lake was utterly calm. The only sound was the soft dip of the oars and the echo of water rippling outward in circles. Every now and then she glanced at her reflection, and sometimes she thought she saw another, pale and faint, rowing beside her. Halfway across, the mist thickened, wrapping the boat in silver haze. For a brief moment she couldn't see the shore, only light and shadow blending together. Then, as the mist began to part, a faint outline appeared ahead, a shoreline hidden and untouched. Tall reeds grew along the edge, and beyond them stood an ancient willow, its long branches brushing the water's surface. Beneath the tree, the ground was soft, blanketed in moss and tiny white flowers. Clara stepped out carefully. The air here felt different, warmer, alive with quiet energy. She could hear the faint hum of water beneath the earth, as if the lake itself was breathing through the soil. Near the base of the willow, something caught her eye, a small stone marker half covered by roots. The letters carved into it were worn but still legible. Evelyn Marin. The lake keeps what it loves. Clara's breath trembled, not from fear but emotion. The initials E.M. The letters from the study. The woman in the portrait, the spirit who had appeared to her. She knelt beside the stone and placed her hand upon it. The air grew very still. Then, a faint warmth bloomed beneath her palm, gentle and steady, like the heartbeat of the earth. A voice drifted through the trees, soft and melodic, not outside her but within her mind. "You found me." Clara closed her eyes. "I think you were never lost," she whispered, "just waiting to be remembered." The willow leaves rustled, even though the air was still. A few white petals fell, landing on the water like tiny lanterns. Each one glowed faintly, floating outward, spreading across the lake. And as they drifted away, Clara felt a peace settle deep within her. The lake was no longer silent. It was singing softly to itself. She stayed there for a long while, watching, breathing, listening, until the mist thinned and sunlight touched the surface of the water once more. By the time Clara returned to the lake house, the sky had turned golden. Sunlight shimmered over the water, catching in the ripples like liquid glass. The house, with its quiet windows and soft shadows, no longer felt empty. It felt awake, like it had been waiting for someone to listen. That night, she couldn't sleep. Not because she was restless, but because the lake called softly to her through the window. Its surface reflected the stars, each one trembling like a note in a silent song. She rose, wrapped herself in a blanket, and went down to the shore. The willow on the far side was barely visible, its outline fading into the mist. But as she stood there listening, she heard something faint, distant, but unmistakable. A melody. It floated across the water like a sigh, slow, haunting, and gentle. The same tune she had heard from the old music box upstairs, the swan's song. Clara sat on the sand, eyes half closed, and let the sound wash over her. It wasn't frightening. It was beautiful, filled with longing and peace all at once. She realized then that the lake wasn't haunted by pain, but by memory, by love that refused to fade. Evelyn Marin's story wasn't one of loss. It was one of return. The melody grew softer, like a lullaby meant for anyone still awake. And as she listened, she saw the willow's branches move, slow, rhythmic, almost as if they were swaying to the music. Then, from beneath the branches, light began to shimmer once more. Dozens of tiny orbs rose from the water, glowing softly, drifting toward her across the lake. Each one flickered like a heartbeat. Clara whispered, "I can hear you now." The orbs circled her gently, their glow reflecting in her eyes. She could feel warmth in the air, the kind that feels like a gentle embrace. And then she heard the voice again, the same calm, ethereal voice that had spoken to her at the willow. The lake remembers because you listened. Tears filled her eyes, not of sadness, but of quiet understanding. She had always carried an ache she couldn't name, a loneliness that never quite left her. But now, standing in the soft glow of the lake's lights, she felt that emptiness lift, replaced by something timeless and full. The lights began to drift back toward the center of the lake, forming a faint spiral of gold and silver. They shimmered for a few moments, then slowly sank beneath the surface. The melody faded with them, leaving only the sound of soft waves and wind through the reeds. Clara stayed there long after the lights disappeared, wrapped in the hush of the night. When she finally returned to bed, the house was quiet again. But just before she drifted into sleep, she thought she heard a whisper, close, kind, and calm. "Rest now, Clara. The lake is keeping watch." And with that, she fell into the deepest, most peaceful sleep she'd ever known. The morning light crept softly through the curtains, wrapping the room in pale gold. The air smelled faintly of water and pine, as if the lake itself had breathed into the house overnight. Clara stirred beneath the blankets, her dreams still clinging to her like mist. She remembered the voice, gentle, calm, whispering, "Rest now, the lake is keeping watch." For the first time since she'd arrived, she felt completely at peace. She dressed quietly, then stepped out onto the porch. The air was cool and still. Silver Pine Lake stretched before her, a perfect mirror for the sky. The willow tree on the far shore shimmered faintly in the morning light. As she stood there, something caught her eye, movement on the dock. The woman in white was there again, Evelyn. Her figure was soft, made of light and mist, but her presence felt real, steady, and warm. She stood with her hands folded in front of her, gazing out over the lake. Clara's breath caught, but her heart remained calm. She stepped closer. "You came back," she whispered. The woman turned slightly, her smile gentle as moonlight. "You listened when no one else could." The voice wasn't heard, but felt a soft vibration in the air, as if the lake itself was speaking through her. Clara asked quietly, "Why me?" Evelyn tilted her head, the edges of her form shimmering. "Because the house remembers kindness. The lake keeps what it loves. You came with open heart and quiet soul, and the lake has chosen you." Clara frowned slightly. chosen me. Every generation the lake seeks a keeper, one who listens, one who stays. Not to haunt, but to hold the stories, to keep them from fading. The air shimmered brighter around them. The water reflected both their faces, one living, one made of light, but in the reflection, they looked almost the same. Clara felt warmth fill her chest, a gentle pulse that matched the rhythm of the waves. She understood now why the house had called to her, why she had inherited it, why the lake had whispered her name. This was her purpose, to keep the peace of this place alive. Evelyn's form began to fade, her glow softening into mist. But before she disappeared, she reached out her hand. Clara lifted hers, and though their fingers didn't quite touch, she felt the warmth, a gentle, lingering heartbeat. "You are the keeper now," Evelyn whispered, "and as long as you remember, the lake will never sleep alone." The air stilled, the lake gleamed, and then the spirit was gone. Clara stood quietly, eyes glistening with tears that didn't fall. She looked out at the endless stretch of water, the ripples moving like breath. A feeling of belonging washed over her, soft, deep, and eternal. She whispered into the quiet, "I'll listen, always." And from across the lake, a single ripple formed, touching the dock where she stood, a silent promise in return. Days passed softly after that night. The lake house seemed brighter now. The light lingered longer through the windows. The air carried a quiet hum that felt alive. Every room, every creaking floorboard, every sigh of the wind seemed to breathe with memory. Clara spent her mornings tending to the old garden behind the house. Wildflowers grew freely there, small white blossoms that swayed in the lake breeze. In the afternoons, she would sit on the porch with a book or a cup of tea, listening to the gentle rhythm of the waves. Sometimes, when the light struck the water just right, she saw her Evelyn reflected faintly on the surface. Never close, never far, always smiling, always peaceful. At night, the lake sang. It wasn't a sound anyone else would have heard, just a low, soft hum that lived beneath the quiet. The melody of the music box, the whisper of the willow, the laughter of time itself blending into one. Clara would often leave the window open, letting the night air fill her room. She found herself breathing in rhythm with the lake's slow, deep calm. And when she closed her eyes, she felt the presence of the house all around her, like a lullaby made of wood and water. The letters from Evelyn remained on the desk in the study. Clara sometimes read them by candlelight, her fingertips tracing the faded ink. She added her own at the bottom, gentle notes about the days, the sunsets, the quiet peace she found here. And though she never tied them with the old blue ribbon, somehow each morning, they were perfectly folded and resting beneath it again. The seasons shifted. The trees turned gold, then bare, then green again. The lake froze once, glittering like glass beneath the winter moon. Through it all, Clara stayed. She spoke to the house sometimes, to the willow, to the still water. And always the lake answered, not in words, but in feeling. Years later, visitors to Silver Pine would sometimes see her light, a lantern glowing faintly by the dock, long after dusk. They said a woman lived alone by the lake, kind-eyed and gentle-voiced, who told stories that could calm even the most restless soul. They never knew that when she spoke, the house listened too. And that sometimes when the moon was full, the water glowed faintly as if the lake itself was remembering. Remembering Evelyn, remembering Clara, remembering the peace between worlds that had never truly ended. The lake kept what it loved, and so, in the quiet rhythm of wind, water, and moonlight, it kept them both. The end.